Hello everyone, Esther Deascus here. Dan and I are back with another episode of The Bigger Picture. Now, Dan was supposed to be the one in front of the camera today, but when I asked, he mumbled something about cleaning up the basement. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure I believe him. It sounded more like a convenient excuse to let me do the talking again. What will be next, Dan? Fixing the roof? So here I am. And maybe that's fitting, because today we talk about education, and education always works better when there's more than one teacher in the room. It connects directly to the last episode on Weimar's scripts. But this time we've moved on to Halle. In fact, that's where our journey through Europe actually began. And the episode is called Scripts of Education. In 1691, August Hermann Francke arrived in Halle. He had faced opposition in Leipzig and Erfurt, where his pietist sermons clashed with Orthodox Lutheran authorities. In Leipzig, he had even been banned from lecturing in 1687. He was part of a movement that encouraged private gatherings for prayer and study, meetings outside the official church. In an age when the Lutheran Church was tightly bound to state authority, this was provocative. Oversight of the church meant oversight of citizens' lives, and Francke had stepped beyond the line. In Halle, however, he found new ground, a position as professor at the newly founded university and as pastor at St. George's Church in Glaucha, just outside the city walls. Francke wore both hats, academic and pastor, but above all, he was a reformer in spirit. The real story began in 1695, not in some grand hall, but in Glaucha, a neglected neighborhood just outside Halle. Francke had received a small donation. From it, he bought school books and employed poor university students to teach abandoned children of the area. From the very beginning, his work at the university was connected with the Project for the Poor. The start was humble. The children even began selling the books, so Francke collected them after class and locked them in a custom-made cupboard. Still, from this fragile experiment, he began to develop a system. Different types of schools followed, designed to meet the needs of different groups, including children of nobility and wealthier families, and, unusually for his time, girls as well. It was all precarious, often short of money. The records are full of his struggles to finance the work. But this too is part of the story. Even the most modern script needs not only vision, but also careful development, constant adjustment, and solid financial grounding. Without it, no project, then or now, affärsarbeitend can endure. By the early 18th century, the Frankische Stiftungen had become a whole educational campus. Schools, orphanage, library, workshops, gardens, even a pharmacy and a printing press. At its peak, nearly 3,000 people lived and worked there, more than 2,000 of them children. In a way, Francke's Stiftungen were like an early integrated operating system, a kind of iOS for education, long before computers. Not digital, but physical. Schools, orphanages, gardens, workshops, and even a printing press all worked together, each like an app, inside a larger framework. It was education not as a single institution, but as a system. For Francke, books mattered, but so did things. Children did not only sit with texts, they encountered the world. They learned crafts in workshops, saw plants grow in gardens, touched objects in the cabinet of curiosities. And above their heads hung one of the strangest teachers of all, a crocodile. It had been brought from abroad and preserved not as a spectacle alone, but as part of learning itself. The crocodile became a symbol that knowledge is not just abstract, but tangible, real, sometimes unsettling, and therefore unforgettable. Francke, in his own way, committed scriptasphemy. But his answer was not to fight dogma head-on. He chose a different path. In Halle, he built something better. Instead of clashing endlessly with orthodoxy, he created a system where orphans and students could flourish. It was a bottom-up approach, grounded not in destruction, but in care, love, and construction. In Halle, Francke raised what looked like a walled garden, a space where learning, faith, and daily life were cultivated side by side. A garden not of escape, but of growth. But even this garden was not free of power. Halle University itself leaned toward pietism under Francke's influence. That meant one script was favored, while another was pushed out. Christian Wolff, a philosopher building a new rational system, even praised the practical morality of the Chinese sages, showing that ethics could exist without revelation. In 1723, pietist opponents branded him dangerous, even atheistic. With pressure from Halle, the Prussian king ordered Wolf to leave within 48 hours on pain of death. He went to Marburg, and only decades later, under Frederick the Great, returned to Halle. Francke had once been the outsider challenging orthodoxy, but in time his own camp enforced boundaries too. Scripts can liberate, but they can also exclude. Power is not only in institutions, it is in the scripts themselves. His own script was not only one of rejection, but also one of creation, a hands-on approach that brought faith down from the heavens into daily life. It became a kind of superscript for building rather than tearing down. And yet, Halle shows us how quickly creative scripts can harden into dogma. Even the best-intentioned scripts must be watched, questioned, and renewed. That choice carries weight for us today. Too often we see counterscripts that define themselves only by what they oppose. They tear down but do not build. Francke's example points to another path: to create scripts so good that they outlast and outshine what came before. There is an old saying that the best can be the enemy of the good. His Halle experiment was proof. Where others clung to rigid doctrine, he showed that a better script, one that worked in practice, could endure. That lesson cuts deep into our present debates. In the 20th century, critics reminded us that knowledge is never neutral, that power shapes discourse. Their warnings were useful, but in view often taken too far. If every truth is only perspective, if every script is only oppression, then the very basis of what we call Enlightenment values begins to erode. The scientific method, freedom of speech, human rights, and religion as a private matter, these were not inventions out of thin air, but the fragile results of a long intellectual tradition. The Enlightenment as a source, not as a finished product. They were fragile and costly. These principles had to be fought for. They were paid for with wars, with blood, with persecution, and they were compromised by injustices of their own. Still, they marked a real step forward. They embodied the conviction that facts, reason, and rights matter. When this foundation is dismissed, public life risks being ruled not by knowledge, but by intimidation, shaming, and subjective feelings elevated as truths. These forms of critique, especially in their often flattened, one-dimensional form, are only counter-scripts. They rest on the Rousseauian dream that if only we could get rid of the bad guys and their institutions, human life would naturally blossom in harmony. History suggests otherwise. Francke's Crocodile reminds us that we need more. Criticism is necessary but not sufficient. To move forward, we must build better scripts, what I call croco scripts, scripts that surpass the old, not by negating them, but by outgrowing them. Scripts rooted in reality like the crocodile itself, undeniable, strange, and unforgettable. Francke built physical structures, orphanages, schools, gardens, workshops, to give shape to his vision of education. His crocodile was more than a curiosity. It was a reminder that knowledge must be built into structures we can see, touch, and live with. Today the challenge is similar, though the stage has shifted. We need tools that help us not only criticize but construct, not only dismantle but organize. The Mentabacus is one such attempt, a framework for building mental structures. It is not about replacing old scripts with their negations, but about offering a better script, one that makes complexity graspable, memorable, and alive. Just as Francke's Halle campus gave children a walled garden in which to grow, the Mentabacus aims to give learners a space in the mind where knowledge can take root and expand. It intends to help build and make visible the mental structures that allow us to grow. A croco script, yes, but one that also remembers. Every script must be tested, refined, and sometimes rewritten. Looking back, it feels almost unreal that our European journey began in Halle, with Francke's scripts and a crocodile hanging from the ceiling. A reminder that history is not just ideas, but things you can see, touch, and remember. And that's today's bigger picture. Francke's Crocodile still hangs in Halle, reminding us that education isn't only about words, but also about the things we build, touch, and live with. His answer to orthodoxy wasn't endless fighting, it was creating something better. A script that lasted. Maybe that's the real question for us too. When we challenge the old ways, are we writing counter-scripts that only tear down? Or are we daring to write better scripts, croco scripts, that make the old ones irrelevant simply by outgrowing them? Dan will be back next time, unless, of course, he finds another excuse. Let's just hope it's not rearranging the attic. Until then, keep building. And remember, as Dan always says, learning isn't a trend. Structure still works. Square, not hip. Visit us at mentabacus.com.
Every story needs structure. Every mind needs a map. Mentabacus. Square, not hip.